Hey guys, and welcome back to the Podcaster's Journey. My name is Caleb, and today we're going to be diving into one of the most important topics for a new podcaster, or even a seasoned podcaster, to be honest with you, and that is defining your niche. If you want to stand out and attract the right listeners, if you want to build a sustainable and a long-lasting podcast, you need to figure out what niche you're speaking into, and finding that niche is super key. In this episode, we're going to talk about ways to find that, strategies, actionable strategies to help you refine your niche and to build your podcast that resonates with your audience. By the end of today's episode, we're going to know why it's essential to niche down. You're going to identify your ideal niche, and you're going to find ways to refine and grow your podcast. So whether you're looking to refocus or whether you're looking to kind of firm things up and figure out which way you're going with your podcast, this episode is for you. It's going to help you find the clarity you need to succeed. So let's dive right in, okay? First part is why niching down matters. So I get it. Why do you want to cut people out to figure out the direction that you're going? So let me give you an example. It might feel like you're closing doors, but this example is that in another business that I run, my piano education business, when I first started, I wanted everybody to come in and learn with me, learn piano. As I got going with that and I brought in just anybody who wanted to learn and anybody who wanted to pay me to be their teacher, I was just doing it and I thought that was going to be great. As I got going with that for a few years, I found that my students weren't progressing the way that I wanted to. And I also found that I wasn't enjoying teaching as much as I was when I first started. And so I started thinking and tinkering with the idea of, no, I'm going to start turning away people who don't fit my program. I know what my program's strengths are. I know that I want to teach people how to read music and be able to read it really clearly. If that's not what they want to do, then my program is not for them. And I started to make that really clear for people and ask people when they came in the door for a free trial class, are you here because you want to learn how to read music? Or do you have other goals? Do you want to play by ear? Do you want to maybe learn how to compose? Are you looking for a strong recital program where you're performing a lot? Different questions like that to kind of figure out where they're at and figure out if my program could really fit them. And guys, I got to tell you that after I did that, it was really empowering. You are turning people away, but you know who you want in your program. You know what your program is strong for. And you could substitute the word program for podcast. You're going to know if you're turning people away, you're not really turning people away. You're opening the doors and providing space for the right people to be there. You're allowing people, the right people, space to come and find your podcast because they're going to feel like you're actually talking to them. It's so important that you know exactly who you're talking to. Many, many new podcasters fall into this trap, and I fall into it myself. As I was practicing for this episode, I wanted to say this bigger, broader picture of who I was trying to reach with this podcast. But it's really, this podcast is for people who are starting their podcast and people who want to elevate their podcast to the next level with some simple tips. And that's who it's for. I wanted to say it was for more people than that, but other people might listen to this and get benefit from it. Great, fantastic. I'm glad to hear that. But the people I'm speaking to, those are the people I'm speaking to. Okay? So in your podcast, you've got to niche down and you've got to figure out who you're talking about. And remember that if your podcast is for everyone, like if my podcast was for anybody who was interested in podcasting, that could work. But as we get into later in some of these points, like it's just too broad. And if your podcast is for everyone, it's really for no one. And, I could be, speaking to anybody who's interested in podcasting. That could work. That might not be too broad, but it's going to be a little bit broader than trying to speak directly to people who are starting out or who are trying to level up their podcast. That's a specific person. That's not somebody who's just interested in listening to podcasts or maybe critiquing podcasts. There's different, there's so many different avenues that you could build a niche around. Niching down just allows you to connect with that specific audience that is passionate about your topic. Don't rob yourself of this. It's really hard, but the hard things in life are worth doing. So we've talked about why, niching down and why we want to do it and how important it is. And I might have left the story a little open-ended for my piano studio, but when I did that, I found that my students were learning better and I found that I was enjoying teaching better. So all that to say, it's so important. Make sure you do it, okay? Sorry, I'm a little jumbled here, but moving on to identifying, how do we identify this? We need a plan and we need a purpose and a way and actionable steps to figure out how to make this happen now. So to find your niche, we're just going to start by asking ourselves 3 simple questions. What are you passionate about? What are you knowledgeable about? And who is your ideal listener? Who wants to listen to that? And then you're just going to simply figure out where the answers to those 3 overlap, so that you can start speaking to that person and speak into that niche. And notice that I keep saying speak to that person. As I was starting this podcast and diving into my niche and figuring out what I was going to speak to and trying to identify my ideal audience or listener base, I came across a resource. I don't remember where it was from. It might have been from Hubhopper. I'm not totally sure right now, but basically this resource was saying that you're going to want to figure out who you want to be speaking to as an individual and speak directly to that person. So right now, these podcasts are aimed directly at somebody who is starting a podcast and who's interested in starting a podcast. So I'm speaking as if I'm talking directly to somebody who's doing that, as if I'm speaking directly to myself, because I am doing that right now. I am doing this podcast as an experiment and a way for me to find out all the pitfalls for my future clients in podcasting, so that I can know more firsthand knowledge and hands-on knowledge what a podcaster experiences, what a host experiences, and the problems they're going through and ways that I can better solve them for them. I can look in from the outside and talk to a ton of hosts, but until I know what they're going through, how am I going to be able to speak directly to them in ways that are going to actually benefit them? So that's a big reason I'm doing this podcast. So anyway, that's kind of a tangent and a soapbox, but identifying your niche, how do we do that? We talked about these questions. So you need to dive into these questions and figure them out. What are you passionate about? What are you knowledgeable about? And who is your ideal listener for those 3? Okay. So let's just do an example. I am currently wearing a shirt from an event that I got to go to for the Rocky Mountain Trials Association. If you're not familiar with that, trials bikes are a form of motorcycles, or maybe a style of motorcycle would be a better way to say it. So as you're thinking about what you're passionate about, let's use motorcycles. Maybe you're passionate about motorcycles, and you're knowledgeable about how they run and how to do maintenance on them and that sort of stuff. So who is your ideal listener? Your ideal listener could be somebody who's interested in learning about maintenance, DIY maintenance for their motorcycle. Okay, so that is a niche that you could speak to. People that are interested in motorcycles, interested in doing their own maintenance on their motorcycles. Okay, so we've got a niche there, okay? So once you have those niche ideas, what you're going to do is you're going to research other podcasts in that sphere, in that area, and look for gaps in the market. Is there a lot of people already talking about that specific topic? Are there a lot of people already talking about motorcycles and maintenance for motorcycles? Are there undeserved, are there angles or, perspectives that you could bring that aren't being addressed in there? Presenting your topic could be as simple as bringing a fresh perspective on a popular topic. It could be crowded and already kind of, really talked about, but maybe you have a unique perspective on it. The other part of it is that is a pretty broad topic. Motorcycles in general could be broken down into many sub-niches. You've got dirt bikes, you've got trials bikes that we just talked about. And both of those are off-road. They're both on dirt or not on pavement. They're also not on a track, but they're very different, even though they're kind of similar. You've got like street bikes. Even within street bikes, you have like Harley Davidson, you've got crotch rockets. So there's all these, even within what you think could be a niche, motorcycles, there's all these sub-niches. And even if we dove down into if we dove down into, let's say we want to do off-road motorcycles, so motorcycles that are on dirt, even there we can sub-niche again, where we're doing maybe motocross motorcycles, we've got trials motorcycles, we've got all these different ways that you can continue to niche down, and that can be a blessing or a curse. As we get further along, we'll talk about that more, but so let's talk about this. We've talked about the importance of finding your niche. We've talked about the importance of building a plan and finding your niche. So it can be really daunting. It's like, this is just a lot to try to figure out to get going. But I want you to know that your niche is not set in stone. You can refine it over time. And I think a healthy niche should be refined over time. It isn't set in stone, and it should grow and change as you gain feedback from your audience. And it's completely normal, and I'd say it's completely healthy. I would say that you want to be open to refining your niche, and you want to be finding ways to refine your niche. And the biggest way to refine your niche would be listening to your listeners. As you're releasing episodes, as you're producing content, figure out what content resonates with your listeners, with that ideal listener base, and figure out how to create more content like the content that has resonated with them. Maybe you've had an interview with a specific thought leader within that niche or industry, and that did really well, and a lot of people listened to it. Maybe you presented a topic about a specific topic in your niche that did really well. Dive into those topics and those things that worked out really well. Or do like questionnaires. If you're on Instagram, do like a quiz or like one of those feedback things, asking people what they want to hear more about. Have conversations. If you have social media, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, whatever it is, where you're having conversations with people, where you're releasing your content, when people comment on it, have a conversation with them. Message people in their DMs to ask them how they're enjoying the podcast, what could be better, what topic do they want covered, and dive into those topics, cover those topics, figure out ways to engage your listeners, and pay attention to what resonates with them, and lean into those topics. It's going to be a gold mine for you. You're going to find such a valuable bit of content that you can create by leaning into your audience, for sure. So a common niche pitfalls to avoid as we're figuring out our niche: avoid the overly broad niches. If we're going back to the motorcycle example, we don't want to do just motorcycles, because as we discussed, there's all those sub niches within there, and just talking about motorcycles is going to leave you too prone to talk to too many people, which you're really not talking to anyone, because it's too broad of a topic. Because you might be interested in all these different forms of motorcycles, or maybe all these different forms of cars, or maybe all these different forms of like beauty care, or whatever your topic is. Niche down and figure out what subtopic you are knowledgeable about, and what way that you can connect with that sub niche, because that sub niche is going to have a group of people that are super passionate about it, just like you are. Versus if you go the step up, let's use the motorcycles. If you're using just motorcycles, there's going to be people who are super passionate about maybe Harley Davidson, but they're not super passionate about maybe KTM. If you're not super familiar, hopefully you're familiar with Harley Davidson. KTM is a dirt bike brand. So you're not going to be able to connect these two listeners. If you're talking broadly about motorcycles and your show is including both these people, the Harley Davidson people are going to be like, why are you talking about KTM? And vice versa. So niche down into Harley Davidson, into KTM, or into dirt bikes, into road bikes, cruisers, that sort of thing. If you're talking about sports, maybe don't make it so broad as to talk about just sports in general. Does that make sense? We don't want to talk about all the sports. Maybe niche down and talk about basketball, or talk about hockey, or talk about football. And there again, maybe you're talking about a specific position within that sport. Maybe you're talking about soccer and you're talking about, strikers across the league. Maybe that's your sub niche. figure out what niche you can talk to and really zero in on speaking to that person who's also super passionate about that topic and they want to hear more or they want to learn more about that topic. Back to my piano teaching example, once I did that and I figured out that I wanted to teach people who wanted to learn how to read music, it was super easy for me to speak to those people and bring those people in. It was also super easy for me to just turn away the people who weren't interested in that. And I didn't have that overly broad niche anymore. On the flip side of this is an exercise in balance for you guys, because on the flip side of this is going to be a hyper-specific niche, and we don't want to go that direction either, because if we get too far down, then we're talking to such a small group of people that there's nobody to, there's not enough people to support your venture with your podcast. So if we use the motorcycle example, maybe we go Harley Davidson, or we go road bike, we go Harley Davidson, we go road bike, cruisers, Harley Davidson, we go specific model of the Harley Davidson. Sorry, I'm not as familiar with that. And then from there, we go maybe a specific run of, I don't know, seats or handlebars that they used for a specific set of years. Like, that is so niche down that there's going to be like, who else is going to want to nerd out on that with you? Maybe there might be 10 other people in the world. Out of 8 billion people, there's probably some people out there who are interested in nerding out on it with you. But is it going to be enough to sustain you in what you're trying to do? Probably not. So we're trying to find the sweet spot between niching down all the way down here and the very broad topic all the way up here. Okay? Again, it's just that balancing act. And it's totally fine. I want to remind you guys, it's totally fine to figure this out as you go. If you start getting too deep, you can always come back up. And if you're going too broad, you can always come back down. Use your audience and lean into them and figure out where your niche is. You can only use your audience, though. I want to say this. You can only use your audience once you've established your niche. So you have to figure out a niche. You have to figure out a direction that you're going to start going and that you're going to start speaking to before you can kind of lean into them and see if you've niched down too much or if you're too broad. So figure that out first. Use those 3 questions that we had up above and go for it, okay? So I just want to, we've talked about the importance of niching down. We've talked about how to identify a niche that aligns with your passions and your expertise. And we want to refine it over time based on our audience feedback. And it's so valuable, guys. I cannot stress that enough. So please take time to build your podcast that has purpose and that has direction. You're building a long-term asset, basically. And if you put the right foundation down, it's going to be a game changer for you. Okay? So if you've been following along for the last several weeks or episodes, I always give an actionable challenge at the end, and today is no different. Today I am asking you guys to go along with me and do this exercise of figuring out your niche. If you already have your niche, great. I want you to refine it. I want you to look at it again, and I want you to think about how you could shift it up a little bit. If you don't have one yet, sit down, ask yourself these questions, and figure out a direction that you can point your podcast in and start traveling that way. So it's if that's as far as you want to take the challenge for today, that's fantastic. But I know that I work a lot better when I have accountability. And so once you have your niche figured out, I want to invite you into our free Facebook group. There's a link in the show notes, and I want you to share your niche. I would love to have a conversation with you about it, brainstorm, talk about it. Yeah, I mean, even if you don't know what your niche is and you want to come work on that together in the community, do that. Come start a thread in the channel, in the Facebook group, where we can discuss your niche together. So find your niche and make it happen this week. So thank you guys for joining. If you guys have any questions, hit me up on Instagram at Caleb.stock. That's Caleb with a K. Would love to have a conversation there with you and help you out. But in the meantime, until next week, Happy podcasting and keep up the great work. We'll see you guys.